Hello, family members. How are you doing today? Well, I hope you were doing well, but now we're going to talk about slurs. Now, there's a lot of discourse about what is and isn't a slur, and it's not uncommon for you to hear things from a bigoted person using a term to describe their particular brand of bigotry as a slur. For example, um, J.K. Rowling will say TERF is a slur. Or some people may say racist is a slur. I don't want to be slurred as a TERF. I don't want to be slurred as a racist. I don't want to be slurred as a homophobe, etc. And then there are words that historically have unambiguously been slurs, such as queer, that exist in sort of a strange place currently because of a deliberate reappropriation of the term that was done by queer people so that they could use the term comfortably to describe themselves instead of letting it become or continue to be the slur that had become. And so I just thought it was worth taking the time to discuss what a slur is and what a slur isn't, and the difference between a label that one chooses for themselves and a description of a person based on their stated beliefs and or actions. So, in the example, I have several labels that I use: aromantic, asexual, all whatever. And in those cases, those are things that I use to describe how I feel, how I experience the world, what it's like to be me. And it would not be appropriate for anyone else to try to use those terms for me. And so that's the difference between a label that a person has freely chosen and a description. Now, a person may describe me as functionally asexual because in actions, I don't really do anything sexual. And so a person might describe me that way, but I wouldn't label myself that way. And I would consider it an incomplete description of who I was, because it wasn't taking into account my feelings. So, how does that apply to the word queer? Well, queer is a term that has been used as a description, other people imposing it on others and saying that they are queer by their actions or their stated desires. But it is also a term that has been used as a label and is used as a label. There are people within the queer community that is the label they use, is queer. They don't really go any more specific than that. Just not, straight cis, hetero, romantic, allosexual, alloromantic, that. And it is completely valid for a person who has historically had queer used against them as a slur to feel uncomfortable with that term. And so that's why, to me, queer can be used sort of broadly to describe a community. But if you're going to describe an individual as queer, it better be a label that they've chosen first and indicated that they feel comfortable with. And if that isn't the case, then the person being called queer could certainly see it as a slur. So it can be an affirming term. It can be an appropriate term. But the feelings of the individual completely make a difference there. Now, let's go on to TERF. TERF is a description. It's not a label. However, there are people who do adopt it as a label. They absolutely accept the label of TERF. I mean, famously, Dave Chappelle said that in his stand-up special, but he's not, he was being, I think, at least somewhat facetious there, I hope. But because I don't think he really considers himself a radical feminist, let's be honest. But there are people who legitimately, that's their ideology, and they fully embrace the idea of being called a trans exclusionary radical feminist. And so, obviously, to call them a TERF is not a slur. But is it a slur to call someone like, I don't know, J.K. Rowling, who does seem to consider TERF a slur, a TERF? Well, that's, I think, a little bit more of a complicated matter, honestly, because obviously she's made it clear how she feels about being called that. However, she is being trans exclusionary, and she is doing it at least with some intention of linking it to a radical feminism. And so, while she may reject it as a label, it's an accurate description. And so I think in that case, it's not so much her feelings that determine if it's a slur, but rather the feelings of the person using the word, using the term. Do they intend it as a bare description of a person's actions and stated beliefs? Or are they looking at it from a perspective of trying to be insulting? And I think most of the time when people use the word TERF, there is a level of derision there. But I don't know. To me, bigotry is a shameful thing. I mean, ContraPoint said it first, but it's true. Bigotry is bad. It should be shamed. You should be ashamed for being a bigot. And so I don't know that the derision that people feel when they describe people as TERFs necessarily turns it into a slur. They're not just trying to insult someone. And it's also another thing, not an inherent part of their being. I didn't choose to be aromantic or aegosexual or any of my micro labels, right? And so when somebody who has chosen to follow an exclusionary ideology is uncomfortable with someone pointing that out to them, that's not the same at all as someone trying to use my innate, inherent identity, immutable identity, as an insult. And so I just don't think that it's really meant or really equivalent to something that you could call a slur. I just don't. I mean, there literally could be people who use it that way. I'm not going to say that there aren't people who, when they use TERF in their brain, it's equivalent to a slur. But I just don't think that's the common usage. And the same thing with bigot, and the same thing with homophobe, transphobe, racist, all of these things that people, all these ideas that people get in their brain if someone else is describing their actions and their stated beliefs using appropriate terminology. It's just not a slur. Cis isn't a slur, you know? It's just a description. It's like saying, you know, my hair is brown. You know, it's a value neutral thing to accurately describe the actions and stated ideas of a person. And if you don't like being described that way, then you just have to not act and speak that way. You know, if you were stealing things and didn't like being called a thief, then your only recourse would be to stop stealing things. If you feel uncomfortable or insulted or upset by being called a TERF or a racist or a bigot or any of those things that people love to say are slurs that are clearly just descriptions, don't do things that would cause you to be accurately described that way. Then people who say that have no basis in saying it. And as one of my former coworkers used to say, if it don't apply, let it fly. If it ain't true, then why does it bother you? You know, like seriously. So, queer could be a slur. Depends on how it's being used and the feelings of the person who it's being used to describe. TERF could be a slur, but I think most of the time it's not. And generally, you know, even in the extreme edge cases where the person using it does intend it as a slur, there's still an easy fix. You just stop being bigoted and you don't have to be called that ever again. So it's difficult, I think, to talk about the meaning of words because they change. They absolutely change. And what I said in this video could absolutely be irrelevant, you know, out of date in a short period of time. It could be that any of the terms that I discuss get new meanings attached or old meanings fall off, because language is a living, breathing thing. And it is determined in the way that people use words. And that is why racist isn't a slur. When somebody is calling another person racist, they're not using it as an insult of a person's innate characteristics. They're using it to describe a person's actions or stated beliefs. And I think it's very telling that people would attack the semantics, would say, oh, TERF, we're going to reclaim that. People aren't going to slur us as TERF, because they don't want to confront the fact that there is something shameful in how they're acting. I mean, I've heard it said before, and I believe it's true. People can forgive you a lot more easily for being wrong than they can for you being right. It is a lot harder to admit that someone else is right and you are wrong than almost anything else in human psychology. And there's these people out there that have got radicalized into these, you know, very misguided worldviews. And rather then be able to see their path has gone astray. They keep trying to pretend that the path they're on is still the path is straight and narrow. They've gone down that, theoretical, like, spooky path in the woods that has, like, all the glowing eyes and ghosts and whatnot. And even though they see all this stuff around them, they just keep telling themselves that they're on the path home, and it's just over that rise. And if I keep on going, I'll be vindicated. I won't ever have to reflect or admit that maybe I was wrong. And, the cost sunk fallacy sets in. People are like, well, I've gone this far, I might as well go a little bit further. Never realizing that they've gone so far astray that it may be impossible for them ever to come back. I hope that people who are bigoted open their eyes and see that every person is just a person. And as much as we want to categorize people into little groups, it just is impossible. But, people want the easy solutions. What can you say? They do. So, you can call me queer. I'm perfectly fine with that. You can call me fat. I'm perfectly fine with that. I know I'm fat. Doesn't bother me. But don't call other people fat unless they said the same, okay? That's not cool. All right. Well, I've talked at you far too long. But, take care of yourselves. Auntie loves you. Bye.